My name is Emilie Sheaffer, and I co-founded with my business partner, Marissa McKinney. We co-founded Logistics for Designers once we found that designers were needing help running their business and especially running the financial aspect of their business. So we've really mastered the integration between House Pro and QuickBooks, and we help designers manage their business from everything to setting up their processes to their financial books, all that fun stuff, payroll, advisory services, and everything in between.
So you are the lifeline. You are the lifeblood of your design clients to help get them back to the creative designing, the stuff that they love doing, being with their clients and making people smile, transforming their homes. Here's a quick agenda we're going to cover today. We're going to show you how to do a profitability analysis per project. We're going to show you how to track your reimbursable expenses when you're on the go, moving between clients, sourcing things, buying stuff at the store. And then we're going to also share some best practices on using the House Pro integration with QuickBooks Online. It's a really strong integration, and you can take advantage of it. So we're going to share some advice there. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. We've curated some top questions from our community of designers that we're going to put in front of Emilie and help shed some light on things. Emilie, you want to give some background on what the heck is a profitability analysis before we jump in there? What does that mean?
So basically, a lot of our designers like to analyze their projects and figure out which one's more profitable so they can really determine what type of projects to take on in the future. So with the integration to QuickBooks, you can run a P&L per project to really analyze your income to cost per project. And that is such a useful tool in running your interior design business, because then you can gear your marketing and your business goals really towards which projects and types of clients you want to gear your business towards and take on in the future.
Okay, so here's a couple of tips that we have on how to do this. So let's get into the mechanics. I think we understand why we should do a profitability analysis, but can you talk us through some of the operational side of it? Like, okay, now what? I agree as a designer, I should do this. Well, now what do we do?
Yeah, well, first off, you have to create purchase orders for all your projects in House Pro. So we need to get that to sync to QuickBooks so you can not only see your income, but you can also see the cost per project.
Mm-hmm. And is that something that the designer should do themselves, or is that something for an admin, for their bookkeeper themselves to do?
It really depends on how large your business is and what your team looks like. But really, you should be ordering off of those purchase orders. So when you get a paid invoice, you'll create purchase orders for everything on the invoice. And then you want to order off of the purchase orders so that you have a reference of what the cost was on the invoice. We have a lot of designers that will have a design assistant that will focus more on order admin and sourcing and communicating with the vendor. And that kind of also frees up some of the time for the designer so they can focus on designing.
Once you have all your purchase orders created in House Pro, then what are we doing? What's the next step in the recipe here?
Yeah, so you just have to make sure you're maintaining those purchase orders and your bookkeeper syncing them over on the QuickBooks side over to your actuals through your bank feed. And then once you're done with that, you can actually run that profit and loss by customer in QuickBooks. So the great thing about QuickBooks Online is there's a bunch of customizable reports where you can which can really help analyze your business.
Okay, so then what's the third step? What do we do after you're running your P&L reporting in QuickBooks Online?
Yeah, then you want to look at your gross profit margin. You can actually also get your gross profit margin as a percentage as well on that P&L, and you can really gauge and look at what was most profitable, which projects, and then that's how you can kind of gear towards which to take on in the future, which ones made the most money.
Got it. Okay, so let's back up there for a second. I heard you mention gross profit. For those in the audience who are afraid to ask or don't want to ask, what's gross profit again?
Yeah, it's basically the simple way to look at it is you take all your income and then you subtract your cost for that project. If we're analyzing our gross profit margin, industry standards for if you're focusing more on interior design, you really want to be between 40 and 60%. And the nice thing is if you set up your mapping correctly in House Pro, you can analyze different income accounts to cost accounts. So you can know how much did I bring in for my design time? How much did I bring in for product, shipping, reimbursable expenses? and different categories that can help you get a deeper level of analysis on your P&L.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I remember connecting my bank accounts to a sort of doing this for my own personal life and realizing, oh my goodness, why do I spend that much money on whatever that category was? And once you can see it, then you can manage it, or you can do something better with it. But if it's all kind of nebulous and you can't track it, it's hard to improve and do something with it. So that's really good advice.
The wonderful thing about House Pro is that it will set you up for success. If you follow the processes in House Pro, you can have accurate, beautiful financials that can really offer so much additional information to help run your business.
And if I'm a new designer who's, for example, just joining House Pro, what kind of time commit is that going to be for me to set things up the right way the first time?
Well, if you're starting with fresh, clean books, that's probably the best time to set it up.
Okay.
Fresh, clean slate, possibly connect with QuickBooks if you have the budget. Really, it's better to do it with clean books than to have to go back a year, 2 years down the road and try to clean everything up. It's probably more cost effective to set it up correctly at the beginning.
And what I'd like to do in this section is just remind people what's reimbursable, what's not, and then how to do it when you're on the go. Because most of the designers that I talk to, they're not at their house all day long. They are out servicing clients and sourcing products. So remind us, what is reimbursable and what does that mean?
Yeah, so reimbursable, if you're just pretty much, it's just if you're recouping an expense that doesn't include markup. That's the more general way to look at it. So like if in your contract, it states that you're billing for travel expenses, mileage, fuel, meals, if you're on location, just possible things that might come up. Samples is a big one that designers usually don't mark up on.
What I've found in running my own businesses and working at other companies is all those nickels and dimes add up, and what they end up doing is taking money out of your pocket. So if you track all the nickels and dimes, you're keeping all the money in your pocket that is your money, that you should not, that you shouldn't just lose or give back to the client or whatnot.
And that will increase your gross profit margin.
What should designers be thinking about for reimbursable expenses, and specifically with the sort of on-the-go use case? Like what are some of your hot tips?
Yeah, I would just set up a rule and a process. For example, we try to teach our designers that if you have one item under $100 and you're tracking your time billing through House Pro, you can actually add it as an expense through your time and expense feature. Okay. So if you're on the go, I would add the expense to the House Pro app on your phone. You can just scan the receipt, add it in there. And then when your bookkeeper asks at the end of the month, most bookkeepers will send like an uncategorized report so that you can add additional details so they know how to book things accordingly on the QBO side. And this is when you would tell your bookkeeper that you already billed for it in time and expense so that they can categorize it correctly on the QBO side. Now, if it's a larger expense, you might want to have a different internal process where you email yourself a copy of the receipt, and then you can add it to a running reimbursable proposal. So you can start to create a new proposal in House Pro where you just add random little things that come up throughout the life of the project. And then when there's a substantial balance, you can send that to the client. And the best thing about the integration between House Pro and QuickBooks is that you can edit a proposal, you can change a proposal. It's basically a working document that does not hit your financials until it becomes an invoice. Yeah. So that allows a lot of flexibility. It's a working document. You can change it until it's an invoice. So proposals do not show up on your financial statements. Invoices will. Even if it's open, paid, whatever, it's going to show up on your financial statements when we look at the cash and accrual. Most states that we've come across require that you file sales tax on the accrual. Okay. So that means that you have to pay sales tax on any open invoices. What we usually recommend in best practices with the integration is that you want to start with your proposal. You can add items to your proposal. Once it's ready, once it's finalized, send the proposal to the designer or to your client. The minute you get payment on the proposal, then you turn it into an invoice. That hits your financials. Now you're paying sales tax on that paid invoice. But if I have a bunch of open invoices, you're going to have to you might have to cover sales tax out of pocket before you get it from the client. if it falls on your filing period. And that gets really tricky if you're filing sales tax monthly or quarterly. You really have to watch out for those open invoices. So that's why we recommend getting payment on the proposal. So you're not having to pay sales tax out of pocket.
With your clients in design, what do you see most common? Monthly sales tax or quarterly sales tax? Is there a best practice or something you recommend?
Most states, it's assigned based on your gross revenue. You'll be assigned. Some states are automatically just monthly.
Okay.
Other states like California, they'll assign it based on your gross sales.
Are there any advantages to filing monthly? Like once you reach a certain scale of your business?
Filing monthly is not always a bad thing because you have to think of it this way. You're collecting that money from your clients.
Yeah.
It's going straight to the state. It's not money that you should be keeping to spend to hold you over for the next month. So really get it out of your checking account, just pay it to the state. I think that's always best. If you have updated financials, you'll know exactly what your net income is and what you can withdraw from the business. The biggest thing is we don't want to change an invoice, especially if you've already filed sales tax for that period. So our monthly designers that are filing sales tax monthly, if you go back and change an invoice, you just altered your sales tax liability reports. You altered the report that you already filed sales tax off of, which can cause a lot of issues on your financials. An invoice is a finalized document. Do not change it. So the way House Pro was set up is it actually takes in mind best practices for the industry, and its software is set up that way to go from proposal to invoice to purchase order. So you can change a proposal without it affecting your financials, turn it into an invoice, and then from your invoice, you create the purchase orders. So you're ordering off of the purchase orders. So that amount, when you're adding a payment onto a purchase order, that amount should match your bank feed. And if it doesn't, there's a discrepancy. You need to go back and maybe communicate with your vendor and figure out, okay, Restoration Hardware had originally quoted me $500. Now it's $700. What's the difference? Did something go up in price? Was there a price change? Did they charge for shipping? And then that's when you have to go back and make sure you invoice the client. Because ultimately the purchase order should match what's on the invoice. And if it doesn't, that's where you're catching what's paid out of pocket. And again, that contributes to your overall profitability because you want to make sure you're not paying anything out of pocket.
If you're doing it right, the invoices are almost like a checking account and you're pulling your purchase orders out of that. It's the cash that you have. That's all that you have. If you need to make changes, do it at the proposal level and get your client to agree and forward you the rest of the money.
Exactly. Yeah. And House Pro will help you do that because all three of those documents are connected.
It sounds like if you do this right, the QuickBooks integration becomes your best friend as a designer because then it makes Emilie's life easier, which in turn makes the designer's life easier and puts more money in their pocket. It's
such a great integration if you do it right.
What kind of stuff are you talking your clients through with respect to House Pro when they're setting things up on QuickBooks?
Mapping is not as detailed as it should be.
Okay.
We have a formula of income to cost accounts that are really detailed and specific to the industry that also help with sales tax. Maybe not doing your mapping as detailed as it should be. Okay. We also see a lot of times that designers will have paid proposals and they forget to go back and turn it into an invoice. So the minute you get notification from House Pro that you received a payment on a proposal, the same day you should be going in and creating that invoice. You should have your proposal one date, the invoice following right after, and then the purchase orders after. And you should order off of the purchase order. So if you follow that sequence, things will map over correctly. The biggest thing we find is that when you get payment on the proposal, you want to turn it into an invoice that day, because sometimes we find glitches if the invoice creation date is created after the payment. The integration makes so much sense. And for the industry logically and for the financial aspect. So if you just follow it, it's great for your business.
The questions we've gathered from our community that I wanted to put in front of you. The first one comes from basically designers saying, okay, what do we do? We touched on this a little bit, but as a designer, how can they set things up in the beginning of the project to make things easier on the bookkeeper or Emilie's team?
So basically, first thing is I would check that the correct sales tax rate is based on the project's address. Don't just Google sales tax rate for that city. You really have to go to your state's portal, plug in the exact project address into the portal, and then you'll get the correct sales tax rate, because we have to deal with counties, cities, all that different things. So really go based off of the address.
Got it. Okay.
In House Pro, you have to enter in the sales tax rate. It's not pulling through the state's portal. Following the processes and the sequence in House Pro, the proposal to invoice to purchase orders. Also, you want to stay consistent and don't let things pile up. So if you're keeping up with everything in House Pro on a weekly or maybe every other day, just depending on the volume of your business, really stay consistent. Where we see a lot of issues is a designer who might be a month or two behind on their billing and their invoicing, and then they try to go back and do everything in one big swoop. That can cause some issues. It's harder to get accurate information if you're going back and doing it. So we just really ask, set time aside on your calendar each week to really make this a priority to add that information in House Pro.
How much time do you think that should take, generally speaking?
It really depends how many projects you have. It really varies. I've seen it be most effective when designers spend the last hour of every day just wrapping things up on their invoices and making sure everything's tidied up in House Pro, maybe doing some of your ordering, just really keeping that last hour of your day to do those bookkeeping things. Or I have other designers that are so busy during the week and on the go that they really just save Friday to do everything and catch up on the week. It just really depends on that. And if you have help, if you have a design assistant. But I think it's key to set time aside to do that and keep yourself on a schedule.
Tell me more about the being accountable for billable hours. Like how does this flow into it? And what should designers keep in mind with billable hours? How does that work, and what can they do? What can they do better with House Pro?
Yeah, I would say track all your time with the stopwatch. Use the stopwatch when you're on the go and make sure you're tracking your time even if you're not billing the client. We also advise our designers, if you're billing based on just a flat rate, still track your time to make sure that flat rate covers the time you worked on that project. Use that stopwatch, track all your time. That becomes more efficient than, I know some designers, like at the end of the month, will just go through and add all their notes that they have on a scratch piece of paper to House Pro and then invoice from that. But the stopwatch is really going to help you because you can just track it as you're working. What
are some of your recommendations here? Because I know the designers the ones that I talk to, they love the client work and the creative work. They don't always love the back office stuff with the receipts and making sure the business is run well.
And that's kind of where you can hire a bookkeeper experienced within your industry. You don't have to be the one doing it. We work with a lot of designers where we do consulting hours and we try to teach them how to use QuickBooks or how to pull the reports from House Pro to file their taxes. And sometimes it just becomes easier to hire an expert to do it. And thinking about that opportunity cost of not designing. So if I hire a bookkeeper for $400 a month and it takes me 10 hours, you got to think about those 10 hours. If you bill $100 an hour, that's $1,000 when you could have just paid someone $400 to do the work. So you just have to think about, is it really cost effective for you to do it or to hire someone? Designers will get to a certain level of their business where they can hire an assistant to do the sourcing, the order admin, and to really help with the data entry within House Pro and adding payments on the purchase orders. That's probably the next hire you might start to look at when you start to get too busy in your business. And then the nice thing is this assistant can just be in House Pro. They don't have to touch the financial aspect of your business in QuickBooks. You can keep your bookkeeper to do that. And then your bookkeeper can run a check and balance on the QBO side of what purchase orders don't match to your actuals.
How should a designer think about the decision to hire an assistant versus maybe an expert?
I guess it depends if you're integrated with QuickBooks. It really just depends where the need is for your business. If you're feeling like, you got the bookkeeping stuff done or, updated and you can manage that, but you need more help doing the ordering and communicating with your vendors, you might want to go with that first. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you have accurate financials, because then you won't know if you can afford that order admin.
Good point.
Or that assistant. So make sure if you can't provide the financial, documents on your own, you might need to hire someone, because it's really hard to figure out what you're making. We work with designers all the time who just don't know their numbers, but just keep working and working and working. That would be really hard for me as a small business owner, seeing the numbers and knowing when we can hire, knowing when we can make those next decisions in our business. That's something we look at weekly, monthly. It's really important to have that information. Otherwise, you're kind of just running your business with your eyes shut.
So we got another question from the community about styling. It happens a lot in the design world. How should you bill for that, and how do you account for that inside of House Pro and QuickBooks?
Yeah, I think it really, I would probably ask a follow-up question to this question. Are you billing the client or are you covering the cost? So if you're billing the client, I would add it to a proposal. Instead of going through your product clipper and adding every single small accessory, you can actually do a lump sum called accessories under that specific vendor. And you can just add that to the proposal if you need to go back and invoice your client. If you're not invoicing the client, I would just communicate with your bookkeeper and you can actually just categorize it on the QBO side.
So we're going to end on a really hard question because it's complex and I wanted to make sure you have time to answer it fully. It's the out-of-state work problem. Sales tax. I'm in one state, another project's in a third state. What the heck do I do? How do I manage that?
Yeah, sales tax is always that fun topic. There's a lot of gray area in sales tax. But the first thing you need to know is that we're going to focus on the final destination, where the project is, where the project address is. So now we need to figure out, is Nexus established? Every state is different. One state might say, okay, if you have $200,000 in sales, you need to start collecting sales tax. One state might say, if you visit the actual project in the state, then you need to start collecting sales tax. So my advice would be to either hire an expert, a sales tax expert within your specific industry, or call the state. Call the state, get someone on the phone, tell them your current situation, how much you anticipate the project to be, if you're visiting the project, and they can really let you know if you should be setting up a resale license and collecting sales tax.
Where can you find a sales tax expert? Is that an accountant or is that something different than an accountant bookkeeper?
It depends. Our firm does specialize in sales tax. So we have a specific sales tax expert on hand who that's all he does. He researches everything about sales tax. He does all our sales tax filings. Some accountants or CPAs will also dabble in sales tax. I would just make sure that they're experienced in sales tax and that they know that specific state. We sometimes do see, previous accountants that designers have worked with that give the wrong information. So just double check that they have the qualifications. My favorite part about the integration is that you can run a sales tax liability report in House Pro, and you can also run one in QuickBooks. The numbers should match up. If they don't match up, you have a discrepancy. And that's when you should go back and do a little bit of legwork. You can also pull your P&L to look at the taxable and non-taxable income. So you're using all three reports to make sure you're filing an accurate amount if you're using all systems together.
Well, that's all the questions we have today. I wanted to send a sincere thanks to you and your team for making time to go through these questions and share some of your knowledge here. If our clients want to reach out to you, we will connect them to you and your firm, because I think there's a lot of value as we approach the end of the year and tax season and whatnot. Sincere thanks for helping us out here.
Thank you for having me.